pick up with a topic, a transitional topic we really haven't talked about yet. The transition from a focus on fiscal policy to monetary policy and why that came about. And it came about because of a thing called stagflation. Stagflation, meaning a stagnant economy with high unemployment. At the same time, we have inflation. Now, as you'll recall, when we were talking about fiscal policy and the Keynesian model, and the different graphs that we drew which explained that model and gave us the relationships in that model, what we saw was that according to that fiscal policy Keynesian view, that if we're in a recession, we need to increase government spending, decrease taxes, in order to get rid of our unemployment problem. So either we're in a depression, recession with a lot of unemployment, and we need to increase spending to get us back to potential income, potential output, full employment. But if we have too much demand, we go from not enough demand in recession to too much demand. Then we have, as the newspapers say, we have too many dollars chasing too few goods. If we have too much demand, well then there's more money going after this, more labor, but there's only a fixed amount of labor and there's only a fixed amount of raw material. If you keep throwing more money to get more and more, what happens is it simply drives up prices without increasing any output, because there are only so many people there to work. There's only so much raw material there to consume. So the picture is that of a tightrope walker, that if you can stay right here at full employment, then you're not going to fall into recessionville. And if you can stay right here, the other side, you fall into inflationville. So the Keynesian model and the Keynesian explanation of inflation, too much demand, or the problem of recession depression, too little demand, was having this aggregate demand that's just right. It's kind of like peas porridge hot, peas porridge cold. You know, you want your peas porridge to be just right, not too hot or too cold. And the Keynesian economist felt we can do that with fiscal policy until we got this really strange thing that happened in the economy that broke the model. The model was too little demand, you got an unemployment recession. Too much demand, you got inflation. But all of a sudden, reality showed us that we could have high inflation and high unemployment both at the same time. No, the Keynesian models, you're either one or the other, but yes, we wound up having a situation where we had something called stagflation, a stagnant economy and inflation at the same time. It was at that point that the orthodox, true blue Keynesians started changing their name a little bit to the neo-Keynesian. Neo means new or improved, neo. So you put that in front of something and it says it's a newer or improved version of something. So the Keynesians who still hold to the efficacy and the value of fiscal policy say, yeah, we still need it, it's still very helpful, but it's not the be-all and end-all. Because you got to have some monetary policy in there as well. The fiscal policy can't carry the burden all by itself, because our traditional Keynesian model really doesn't explain something called stagflation. According to the model, there is no way that you can make the model give that sort of output, but that's what we saw in the economy, so evidently our model's not sufficient enough to handle all the different variations. And so the emphasis went from fiscal policy to monetary policy, from Keynesianism to a Milton Friedman version of monetarism, in which we don't look to the federal government to fix inflation or recession. We begin to look to the central bank. The central bank, which can fine-tune the economy, because the government can't. The government can't tune the economy at all because it's a bunch of politicians. But if we have some people that are independent of politics, who are not elected politicians, who are professional accountants, economists, and they have the power to adjust the money supply, then we can implement monetary policy. And by review, monetary policy is the idea of controlling the economy by controlling the money supply. So our transition from fiscal policy to monetary policy really was over this issue of stagnation and stagnation, we're in a state of stagnation, all right, stagflation, and it fell out of favor until the relatively kind of recent Bush 2 administration, where when something bad goes on, then whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing, it's important that the government, quote, do something. The idea, unless the government does something, we're all doomed. And therefore, when the government jumps back in and starts spending money, like Mr. Obama has for building infrastructure to get the economy going again, he's going back to the old policy of fiscal policy because he's doing something, and that something is through the federal government, whether it's buying out General Motors or bailing out Wall Street. He's doing something that has to do with the federal government doing it instead of having the central bank, Federal Reserve, doing it all by itself. So I'm gonna pick up on this issue just a little bit by way of getting back into our topic here of money and fiscal policy and monetary policy. And I want to, again, by way of review, remind you of this illustration, which we've looked at depth before, but I want to bring it back to your memory here. We were saying that what makes us feel economically prosperous, and what makes us feel economically prosperous is how many goods and services can we consume in a year. If I can consume twice as much as you, whether it's putting money into the stock market or building a nicer house, then I feel twice as wealthy as you. So it's the amount of stuff that we produce and consume in comparison to the amount of labor that we have to expend. So we're giving up our labor in order to get the things that we want, and this stuff in the middle is the money that simply is the oil that makes this exchange go smoothly. It reduces the friction of us exchanging our labor to get the things that we want. And money is the most liquid of all assets, meaning it flows like currents in a river flow. We call it currency because there's practically no friction. I mean, it goes from hand to hand to hand to hand to hand to hand as fast as you can blink your eye. But is your house very liquid? I mean, does your house change from hand to hand to hand to hand 3 or 4, 5, 6, 10 times a day? No, it is not liquid at all. You've got to hire some sort of real estate agent, and you got to go through all these forms, and you got to do all this sort of stuff. It takes a long time to make a house liquid in order to turn it into money. It takes a long time. Now, things that are relatively liquid are kind of stocks. You have stocks that are relatively liquid because you can call your stockbroker. They can probably call you back within a half hour and say, yeah, we sold your stock and then we just direct deposited the money in your bank. Well, it took like a half hour or an hour. So it's a whole lot more liquid than your house. But if you've got a lawnmower or something, or a bulldozer or something, you just can't turn that into cash very, very quickly, which means it's a fairly illiquid asset. It doesn't work very good as money. Now, money is the thing that makes these transactions work very smoothly. A key idea behind monetary policy is increasing or decreasing the money supply in order to expand or contract the economy, make the economy boom, or to cool off the economy from an inflated state. But notice what this model is showing us. If we simply, if this was like the model of the engine of your car, and it's the oil inside the engine of your car which reduces the friction, which allows all these different moving parts to get along with each other and doesn't create heat because they're all happy to move with each other. You've got to have a minimal amount of that oil in there. If that oil goes away, then all of a sudden the heat goes up and everything expands, the person, it just binds up and it just welds itself together. So you need a minimal amount of this oil. But if we increase the money supply into our system, does that create more people and more labor hours? And does more money generate more goods and services? And I'll say the illusion is more money seems like it's the same thing as more wealth, more purchasing power. The more money I have in my checking account, the wealthier I feel. But is that the same thing as putting more money into the economy to create more goods and services, where the only way we get goods and services is if we take human labor and we put it through some sort of capital device? So the analogy is adding more money to the system does not actually add more wealth to the economy, although that is the major tool of monetary policy. Well, why do we do it? Why does it look like it adds wealth to the economy? It looks that way, and I'm trying to remember if we went through that example of the little old counterfeiter from Park Avenue West. Did we go through that example? I thought we did. It looks that way because when we spend that new money into the circulation, I can't tell the difference between this dollar bill that was made 2 years ago and this dollar bill that was made 10 days ago. To me, they are the same thing. But a dollar bill in circulation with a low amount of money in circulation has a different purchasing power than a new dollar bill with a whole lot more money in circulation. So I can't tell the difference between the relative purchasing power between an old dollar and a new dollar because they both look the same. The exaggerated thing we did was, I can't really tell the difference between a dollar back here in 1964 or 1965, which bought a GTO, and a dollar in my pocket over here in the year 2014, 2015. The dollar looks the same, but this purchasing power dollar is vastly more powerful than this diluted down purchasing value dollar. But they both look like they're the same. And because they both look like the same, when we spend it, what goes through our mind is, oh, people really want this. Because here's a dollar, they want to buy my baskets, they want to buy my car, they want to buy my stuff. But we don't realize that that's an illusion of more desire for this stuff, because this is simply, it's simply the measuring stick of what everything else is worth. It's simply the standard for which we evaluate the scarcity of everything else. And if I'm struggling for an illustration here, because money is simply a standard that we use for a measure of scarcity. And we have a Bureau of Weights and Measures, which supposedly, they do a good job from all I know, that they define what an inch is and what a yard is and what a gallon is. So if I was buying cloth and I want 5 yards of cloth, here's a yardstick. 1, 2, 3, that's how much cloth I want. But what if next year I want to buy 5 yards of cloth, but the yardstick isn't this long anymore, the yardstick is only this long. Oh, this is a yard right here. And so now 5 yards of cloth is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That cloth isn't as much as the original cloth, but they're both 5 yards, right? Not if the standard of measure has changed. Not if the quantity of money has changed. Not if the value of the dollar has changed. But it gives us the illusion of more because we're counting 5 or whatever. But really, how much is the money buying? That's a little bit of background. We left off before when we were talking about, I believe, the first Bank of Dodge City. And so we're going to pick up with that discussion because I want to interject this stagflation thing and go back to some transition from fiscal to monetary policy before I jump back into the tools of monetary policy and how monetary policy works in the money and banking system. And that's what we're going to pick up in the next session.